Here now with me is the filmmaker, Dr. Mike Poltorak. He's a social, medical and visual anthropologist who did research in Tonga, New Zealand, Sweden and Germany. You finished your PhD in social and medical anthropology in 2001, and you held teaching and research positions at the University of Sussex, Brunel, Manchester, UCL, Oxford and Kent, which you're currently, right?
I left.
You left, okay. So, and now in Zurich, you're living. And additionally to all your publications in journals, you also made 4 feature documentaries. One of them we just saw. And The Healer and the Psychiatrist won also, for example, the Society of Visual Anthropology Best Feature Film Award 2020. Yes, and also was screened in numerous festivals, also here. Yes, so hello Mike, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Yes, true. Yes, and also thanks for this touching film. I really enjoyed watching it, and also I really felt that you had a strong connection with the people there. That was for me very visible or feelable. Are you still in touch with the people?
Oh, Emelina calls me at least twice a week.
Ah, really?
She takes her responsibility as my 2 sons' grandmother, in effect, quite seriously. So, yeah, she calls me more than any other friend I have. In fact, no other friends call me. They will Facebook message me, they will WhatsApp, but Emelina will call me. And it's usually at 8 o'clock in the morning or 8 o'clock at night. And yeah, so we're in very close contact. And Mappa also, less frequent, perhaps because he's more busy with his work. But yeah, we keep in touch. With Mappa, it's more with email.
Yeah, nice. So also this has been your research interest for more than 20 years, also your doctoral fieldwork it was. So could you maybe tell us how this interest came for this region, for Tonga, and how you established those relationships for the film?
Okay, so there's many versions of that story. There's the official version, there's the version, and I'm not entirely attached to any version, but the version that didn't appear in the film was that I climbed a volcano in Ecuador after having wanted to do research on shamans in the Amazonian jungle with indigenous peoples. And because of just the nature of the jungle and because of colonialism there, I realized that that wasn't the place to do my research. I very much wanted to do research on a traditional system of healing that would pose a critique or make a contribution to the way we see sickness in the Western context. So I climbed the volcano and I said, I think God or the Great Spirit, I can't remember which, please give me a sign, where should I go? And an eagle appeared and flew westwards, and where I was, Tungurahua in Ecuador, it was only when I got back to the UK 3 or 4 months later I noted the direction and I realized that it was actually flying to the heart of Polynesia. But there was history before that. I had been quite ill at university, and that had prompted a lot of reflection and thought about what sickness really is. And I'd become very interested in shamanism as the kind of the universal ancestral healing system that we, I guess, would all resonate with, because our genetic history is one of being hunter-gatherers till only about 15,000 years ago. So there was a multitude of ideas. And when I realized that Tonga existed and that it had never been colonized formally and that it had a long tradition of traditional healing, but also a lot of anthropologists had worked there, I realized I could do research there and not have to do a lot of the work that many anthropologists have to do in new cultures, which is linguistics, really understand the language, the kinship, many other aspects. I could really dive in straight to what I was interested in. And what I was interested in was how healing transforms people's experience of themselves and their experience of interrelationship with others. And Tonga felt like a really good place to do that research. So that's why I ended up in Tonga. The film was a long long process. I took a camera to film healing, because I knew it was difficult to record by notes. And I also, but very quickly people asked me to film things for them. And so I became almost like a vernacular filmmaker at the service of Tongans for funerals, weddings, other social events. And so in a way, the film is the result of the seed of two ways of filmmaking. Filming for social purpose, as a connecting mechanism, as a gift to bring people together, and on the other side as a kind of record of things that have happened, that we forget but we need to refer back to sometimes because they're important to remember. So it's a combination of documentary as some kind of objective, which, although we don't really believe in that word now, record, and film as a way of connecting people and as a gift that facilitates further processes of understanding and impact in social change. I could carry on talking for another 2 hours on all the little stories. I've got some good stories as well, just like Jean has. But the one that I think really sticks in my mind is I wanted to make a film about a friend of mine who had died of diabetes. And I wanted to make a film which was going to be entitled "Why Did Siwa Die of Diabetes?" I had made a film about him and a famous comedian before. That was like the first film I made on Tonga. And I realized very quickly that this film wouldn't work because it was very shameful why he had actually died. And that the premises for making the film were all wrong. And so I shared my frustration that it wasn't working with a very good friend, a filmmaker, there in Vavap, where I was living. And he said, "Mike, basically, you've been working with a healer and a psychiatrist on spirits for the last 10 years. Why aren't you making a film about them?" And so that was in 2008 or 2011, I can't remember exactly when. That's when I decided to start working towards a film that would bring the two people into dialogue.
Oh, nice. And so you already had a long friendship with them?
Yeah.
Yeah. Nice. And you brought them into dialogue by showing them video material and also enabling a kind of communication between them, and that's something that's a method you often used, right? Could you maybe tell us more about this? Like, what is the potential of this way of communicating between people, but maybe also the limits of it?
I mean, I was inspired. Actually, the original inspiration wasn't a theoretical one. It was actually my colleagues Daniela Peluso and Miguel Alexiades, two dear colleagues of mine who work in Amazonia, ironically, and they had always told me about how they would film people in one community and then they would travel downriver or upriver, sometimes at quite long distances, and share the video that they had filmed of video messages that people had given them to give to other people. And they had done that for many, many years, and I thought, wow, what an incredible way to connect people. And so that had kind of sowed a very practical seed. And how it worked actually pragmatically in the field was that the first prompt to use this method for the film was Filomena, who, when I went to interview her on the third occasion about this very ambiguous episode that she experienced that appears in the beginning of the film from 1998, she pulled out the DVD of this film, which is an Anthony Hopkins film called The Right. Quite a fascinating film if you guys ever want to watch it, about spirit possession in Italy. And Emelina was so affected by watching this film that I thought, what would Mappa think of it? And so they both saw the film, and that was the first prompt to show them something that precipitated a conversation. And they both responded very surprisingly. Mappa responded in ways that I didn't think he would, that he was much more open and revelatory about actually how much he believed in spirits and the possibility of spirits impacting on people. And it gave Emelina much more courage to continue her work, because as Filomena also says, not appeared in the film, that, wow, in Tonga we have healers who can heal people with spiritual problems, but in Italy all they have are psychiatrists and priests. Yeah. which is not strictly true, but that's how the film made it seem.
I have many more questions, but also I want to open it up. So, do you want to ask questions about the film? And yes,
I have 2 questions. I just wondered the significance of the basket thing that they put on when they go to church or when they go to ceremonies. Is there a reason they're kind of protecting their chakras, or is there some kind of reason for that?
I wish they would give that explanation, because then I'll be able to link Tonga to Indian mysticism and lots of other New Age stuff. No. The making of mats is something that goes back to Tongan, for the 4,000 Tongan year history, and mats are valuables. I'm not a material culturalist, so I can't comment kind of with expertise on this. But mats are valuables, and mats are used to signify relationships, and they're gifted at funerals and weddings. So they circulate. The bigger mats that Emelina was weaving in the film. The mats that people wear demonstrate respect. It's a form of clothing like a suit or other formal clothing you'd have in other cultures. And it's expected to wear that in particular events, particularly in funerals. So, and there's very different kinds of mats that different people will wear in relationship to the deceased. So mats are fundamental, and many women's lives are very much oriented in some islands to the weaving of mats, because it's through the weaving of mats that they can bring, that they can exchange for capital from the diaspora and bring money into the community to pay for important things. So it's very much part of the anthropology and the material culture of Tonga to focus on the mats. There's also tapa, which is another valuable, but it's not made so much in Vava'o, where I was based, more in the central islands of Ha'apai.
The other question is, when did Christianity arrive on this little island? There was quite a lot of traditional healing suppressed.
It's a very good question, and it's very difficult to know, because there's not a very strong record prior to the arrival of missionaries about what traditional healing was like. There's a very good report that covered, actually in quite great detail, about what people did, but the healing aspect wasn't covered in great detail. But there's great continuities in how, that you would suppose that there's great continuities that have been influenced by the interaction with Christianity. Christianity is very much embedded and was embraced by Tongans as a way to resolve political issues that they were having at the time. And so we would never say now that Christianity is a foreign faith. Christianity is Tongan. And you see continuities in many aspects of life from pre-Christianity, but you also see discontinuities. But those were all very much valued, at least at the time, and still continue to be by most people in Tonga. There's discussions now about what we lost, but for the most part, Tonga is a Christian nation. I can't remember the exact date when Tonga was Christianized. Apologies. I'm not so good with the dates.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just wanted to thank you for sharing your life's work with us and continue on the same note. I was also wondering about this friction between the traditional healing knowledge and this more kind of Western external knowledge that came in, and how the last scene where she was throwing away her medicines seemed so powerful to me, and how there's almost a little bit of a, not maybe a competition is maybe the wrong word, but the legitimacy of the traditional knowledge in that moment I felt was being questioned by herself. And the way I interpreted it was that through the death of her husband, that maybe could have been saved with Western medicine, and that's what she acknowledged in the movie as well. She maybe was trying to process that in her own way, in her relationship to her healing medicine. And I wondered if you experienced a change in her and how she related to her own healing methods, or if that was just a temporary kind of ritual that she did in that moment to reconcile that friction.
When she was throwing away the medication, this was from a treatment she had done with two people, one of which had come from Australia, didn't feature in the film, who had rheumatoid arthritis. And the cut was a way of... so the healing remedy that was thrown into the ocean wasn't from anybody that appeared in the film, unfortunately. Emeline would never doubt her own treatment because fundamentally she is a vessel for God, and her deep faith, and the faith of most people in Tonga, is premised on that fact, and also a great sense that of acceptance in the face of death. So many people die in Tonga for reasons that we would find unfathomable, but they're for the most part accepted without blame or even diving too deep into the origins of that person's death, because a person's death is in a sense chosen. So even when there was a huge disaster, a boat sank in Tonga and with the loss of many lives, at least in Vava'u, the conversations often revolved around how there was signs that this person would die beforehand, and the conversations didn't lead to blame or a desire for the government to be held accountable. That was different on the main island, where people are a little bit more critical of government, but not in Vava'u. So for the most part, even though we see scenes that would lead us to question that Western traditional medicine works, traditional medicine is a gift that the healer gives to help a family. If it works, that's wonderful. If it doesn't work, then in the sense that the person eventually dies, the traditional healer has always been helpful in some way. There's never a point in which healing gifted by a traditional healer isn't valued and welcomed and received in the spirit that it's given as support. So people are not really assessing treatments in the same way that maybe a medical anthropologist would, or someone who is very, in the way that we're very privileged to have access to kind of very high quality medical care.
So people, they accepted traditional medicine, but they're maybe more critical towards hospitals, like we saw.
They would be more critical to hospitals, and that was referenced by Alani. The joke is that everything that people have, they give them Panadol for. Yeah. And there's a limit to what Panadol can do. Yeah, it's quite a wide limit, I might say, that Panadol actually can help many things, but it's limited in what it can do. And so there's much more critique now than there was 20 years ago, and that's facilitated through Facebook, because many people now are sharing their frustrations with an aunt or an uncle who's died unnecessarily, and because there's many more people now in the second generation who are medically trained in the diaspora, we see a kind of a different critique entering. But for the most part, there's still kind of an acceptance and a desire not to critique. Yeah. And I hope that the film shifts that landscape in some way, that it can contribute to different conversations that can be had about the need for better communication and better health services.
Yeah, I have another question, sorry. I was intrigued by the rhythm of the movement of the people and the slowness, continuous slowness. And one thing I'm wondering, what effect did it have on you to live among people who move so slowly? I was wondering, the way they deal with health and spirits, and if there was it was all embedded in a completely different rhythm that we're living in.
Yeah, I think you've said something very profound about the way people are living in Tonga. Time and space is radically different, and the idea of kind of productivity or being self-productive subject. People, it's very difficult to make completely general statements, because obviously we're talking about a culture that's also very diverse personality and with people, and so. But there is a way in which people are very responsive to requests for help. And once they've satisfied those requests for help for a funeral or for work, their time is entirely their own. And so people will often reference, and that's changing subtly because of changes in Tonga, but I remember 20 years ago people would say, we live very free lives here in Vava'u. We do what we want, when we want. And I would say, well, you're not entirely true, because when a family member wants you to come and work for 3 days solid to help with the funeral, then it's not entirely freedom, is it? But that was a kind of a completely erroneous question, because why wouldn't somebody in a very socially embedded culture immediately want to entirely be trained and socialized to help somebody else? So there is a tiny different rhythm, and that took a long time for me to accept. Sunday afternoons was a time when people do absolutely nothing after church and after eating, and it took me a good year before I could totally just enjoy the fact of not doing anything. And it permeated. It took even longer to really to be able to enjoy it, because of course I was in a very different position. There was more pressures on me to be able to do the research I needed to, and so yeah, I was perceived by some people as a little bit too energetic. Yeah, so why would you want to cycle to 4 or 5 villages in a day and talk to like 4 or 5 different healers when you could quite easily, just talk to one? Might have been the question, but every person who's foreign to Tonga kind of adapts to Tonga and its pace and its culture in different ways. So that was just my particular way of adapting, I think.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. My second question was related to, I felt the gendered aspect that I saw in this healing kind of lineage. She was mentioning that, the medicine she was getting from this land that were from her great-great-grandparents, and she somehow also touched on the topic of how her healing capabilities she was transferring to her daughter. And so my question is in a way two. One is how is this healing properties, or are healers mainly women? And the question comes because I've seen that she mainly treated women. There was one man that she mentioned, and then when we looked at the psychiatrist, he was mainly around men, and when it came to the sickness of her husband, he also went to the hospital, and so I felt that there was gender division. I was wondering if that was actually a thing or just coincidence.
There's a certain truth in the gender division, in the sense that women would most usually come to know about other women's sickness because of the nature of their relationships and sharing within the weaving shed, than of men's sickness. But the healing itself isn't gendered. Emelina will treat anyone who comes to ask for help, and she also treats many men. But I suspect there are some men who have quite serious early symptoms of mental illness, if you kind of agree that it's in the psychiatric ontology, or nosology rather, who will develop symptoms that are more difficult to treat in Tongan terms, like early onset psychosis might lead to somebody leaving the community, or perhaps being much more physically strong and difficult to hold down and contain. And those are the kind of patients that MAPA really needs to treat quite quickly and early. In the psychiatric unit, there are also many women patients, but they don't participate in MAPA's Carver Circle, because that's something that, as yet in Tonga, is not a typical women's activity. Though that is also slowly changing. In New Zealand and diaspora, women are creating Carver Circles where they discuss and kind of take on board this potential, this possibility of an ancestral, valuable genealogical plant that can serve really powerful spiritual and social purposes. And the women in the psychiatric unit will also tend to have more opportunity to share with other female nurses. There's more female nurses, psychiatric nurses, than male, and will have avenues to share and give information that's also important for MAPA to be able to know. So he will get that information perhaps by one step removed. So when I was going around with Emelina, she treated maybe a third of her patients were men, and the rest were women. Yeah. but it's also an artifice of what was possible to be filmed, in the sense that Mappa very much wanted me to film within the psychiatric unit when he was doing the Carver, because those were people who also had appeared on television before, and so they would be comfortable to be screened and their identities revealed to wider audiences. Other patients would not be so willing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Other question? I don't see it so well. Mm-hmm. Good. So I check the time. You also portrait mainly 2 or also 3 people, which also try to or dedicate a lot to their patients and also try to communicate a lot with them. Do you think there is a lack of communication, or also because it's also so touching? Like there are 2 deaths in the film, which are, which maybe could have been, maybe they could have been not happened. But do you think, is this film also like a call for more communication and?
Yeah, this film is just part of a kind of wider, I guess you could call it an intervention, which also includes an interactive website where there's lots more information about the kind of key concepts that need to be understood to appreciate what's going on here. It's called Project Pouono, and that contains a lot more of the video footage that it doesn't appear in the film, but also emerged out of an artistic process of inviting an amazing artist and curator, tapa designer from Australia called Ruha Fefita, to take the film and watch it, and then watch it with family in Tonga and identify what was really most meaningful to them, and then design a tapa cloth with symbols and motifs that captured the important concepts that relate to the film and the origin of the film and its intention afterwards. So I see the film as being really the starting point of many more interventions, discussions, what we call talanoa in the Pacific world, which is culturally sensitive discussion around important themes with the intention of positive change. And so that's why for me the most important screenings for me really were ones in which the Tongan community or the wider Pacific community could have some form of input and contribute. And so that some of the income from the film, it also is going to go to an NGO in New Zealand that works and is going to be working more on the question of health communication there. And so I still feel it's very much early days as to the potential of the film. It was screened on Tongan television last December, and I'm hearing kind of informally how it's starting discussions, but as yet I have not heard of any concrete policy changes in relation to... There's an amazing woman called Sia Ohila who created a website and Facebook page called Ordinary Tongan Lives, and every week or maybe twice a week sometimes she posts detailed stories of particular people in Tonga and a picture of them. And it's usually related to challenges they faced in life. And they are the most, I would say, the most transformative and insightful insight into Tonga, contemporary Tonga, that has been rendered ever in the history of Tonga. And anthropology kind of pales in comparison to the capacity of these stories to really reveal what is important. Not only because Sia is Tongan, but also because she has a very keen insight into what needs to be translated for a wider audience, not only Tongans but also us. And she's also noticed that the telling of stories around concrete themes have very important effects in Tonga. And so an individual story of a person or something that's happened to them that then is shared thousands of times on Facebook and is talked about within the community often has influences in terms of changing politicians and policymakers' ideas about what should be done, perhaps more so because it has this social dynamic than like an analysis rendered by kind of a development expert from overseas. The integration of some of what she's doing with the film and the website that the stories within the film will resonate and touch nerves in ways that will lead to positive change.
Nice. So, yes.
Well, Mike, first of all, I'd like to thank you for being a great friend to EthnoKino for so many years. It's always great to have you. And I want to invite you to expand a little bit more on the current impact it is having not only in Tonga, but at the international level. There is a story, the WHO, that starts somehow developing, so maybe this can be a nice follow-up to the answer you just gave.
Thanks, Pavel. Yeah, I love EthnoKino, and it's been like a home from from Panadol, on the lake. I very much wanted the film to enter into spaces that also Tongans would very much value, and it's a small island in the middle of the South Pacific of 100,000 people, but you'll be amazed actually how much influence Tongans have had within the global sphere of organizations. And so there was actually a Tongan who worked for the WHO many years ago. And 2 years ago, the Director General of WHO, Dr Tedros, went to Tonga on a visit. And quite wonderfully, and this really moves me, he went to visit Mapa and was invited to do kava with the patients. And he was supposed to be there only 10 minutes. But he was so moved by what Mapa was doing, and that really moves me very deeply, that he stayed for an hour. And he really connected to what Mapa was doing, and Mapa also connected to him. And so when, almost a year and a half later, I contacted the WHO to say that I'd very much like to show the film for them in Geneva, they were very receptive, and it was because of this connection that had been built between Dr. Tedros and Dr. Poltorak. So we screened it in March of this year, and they invited people from different directorships to speak to the film and speak of its value and its future benefit, not only within the WHO but also more broadly. And the reception was very, very positive. And what they identified as being most important at the beginning was the way in which culture and mental health interact, and how this is a very vital model that needs to be recognized and encouraged in all global mental health initiatives. So that related very strongly to what Mapa was doing, and Emelina was also very much celebrated for the commitment and the time and the sensitivity that she was exhibiting. And I think they very much valued the portrayal of a traditional healer in a cultural context that really showed how to really understand traditional healing you have to have a kind of deep cultural insight that's often facilitated through anthropological field work. So, and I had tried to show the film, I tried to make contact with WHO in Manila about 15 years ago, and since that time I felt like there's been a kind of sea change in the way that the WHO is relating to anthropology and the recognition of how culture and health interact. So, I only recently finished the Q&A session and have now shared it online. So I'm hoping that out of that will develop more conversations that also relate to the other NGOs that might be interested in using the film, that also support and draw on WHO insight and policy changes. So as I said, it's still kind of early days also with the WHO intervention. And in terms of wider impact, I mean, it's been screened at a lot of Pacific international film festivals, which I'm very happy about. But the thing that still doesn't frustrate me but saddens me, that it still hasn't found a kind of big festival screening in New Zealand. And there's something about that is making me think about why. And I think, and I still haven't entirely figured it out, but I think there's something about the fact that the film doesn't have enough co-directors that are Tongans. If there had been co-directors that had been Tongans, then it would have been accepted at least one festival, key festival, and that is something that so I think to myself now, why didn't I make, because it's very possible to make Mappa and Emelina a co-director of the film, and at the time I felt like it was dishonest because there wasn't the potential for the deep kind of feedback that's necessary to make a film, which would make it justifiable to credit them as directors. But I also noticed subsequently that many other filmmakers do credit other participants in films, potentially ones who have very strong agendas and speak very strongly within films, co-directorship status. And so this is an area in which I'm kind of reconsidering. I also didn't identify them as co-directors because I thought that if the film was in some way inappropriate, that I wanted to be the one who took full responsibility for that. And so, yeah, so that is still something I'm working on, because New Zealand has to be the place where the film has the most impact, because New Zealand is the most exciting place now in the world in relation to culture and mental health. And it's the place where will be most mobilization among the Tongan diaspora to help improve Tongan health in the islands itself.
Interesting. So really, it would be nice if it will be screened there.
Yeah, I mean that's where I did many of the feedback sessions, because it's in New Zealand where people are straddling these different positions in relation to health, and also most value a film that seeks to find a middle ground between these different systems. For many people in Tonga, they will say, "Oh yeah, well, this is just we know this. I mean, this is our reality." So it's often people who are outside of Tonga, who are Tongans, who value it and see it for what it's worth, as a way of kind of mediating and communicating between different cultural views and positions.
Nice. So, any other questions? Yeah.
So thank you so much. It was such a fascinating work, and that was really amazing. Thank you so much. I think it was mentioned briefly that you're also a professor and you teach. That means you have students, and I'd be interested in kind of the works your students are doing. So, what is the legacy? What's going on? What's going on in your field that you're teaching in?
That's a lovely question, thank you. It makes me nostalgic. I actually left my job in Kent last year in September, but prior to that I had taught visual anthropology for 10 years. And it was really interesting because I screened the film at Kent. It was one of the first screenings, I think last year. What year are we now? No, 2019. And many of my students were invited, and they came and said, "Mike, now we totally understand what you were trying to teach us to do all these 10 years." And in a way, when I taught visual anthropology at Kent, I had been very much influenced by Tonga and the value of filmmaking for social change, but also as a service to the communities we work with. And so when I taught them, I always encouraged them to see the relationship between them and the people they were working with as the most fundamental thing to cherish. And of course the technical is very, very important, but the most important thing about the film is that the relationship between the filmmaker and the people has integrity and is honest and transparent. And I also encouraged them to make films about things that that moved them and that were very important to them. So to make films that were films that they had to make in a way, that related to their own personal lives or issues that they were facing. And I was always so moved and impressed by what the students did with that encouragement, and have made films that were very remarkable in terms of opening up in relation to issues such as mental health, suicide, rape, personal challenges they were experiencing, as well as making films that were also about other people, not only themselves. So the legacy of that filmmaking is that there's lots of those students have gone on to make other films and have gone to work in NGOs, also gone on to do masters and PhDs, and I think the legacy for me is that we really have to, as filmmakers, really understand ourselves and our commitment to the craft and why we're so committed to it before we try and do justice to other people. And I think, and this is also inspired by Tongans, because in Tongan universities, in universities where Pacific Island students come, particularly in Auckland and also in Hawaii, they're very much encouraged to share their origin and their kinship and their genealogy. And often in universities, Western universities, the process of disciplining is a process of denying or making those things that brought someone into university seem less significant than they are. Whereas in actual fact, they're the most significant thing that we bring into an educational space. The real life experience and histories that we carry that motivate us. And so the integration of those two things is always the things I was trying to achieve in teaching visual anthropology. And that's what makes visual anthropology so exciting for me, because it is such a remarkable way to be able to integrate across multiple human experiences, but also multiple academic expertises.
Good. So, if there are no other questions, I think I'll say thank you very much for
Thank
coming
you,
here.
Livia.